Exercise 13 at the end of Chapter 10, the short-run decision analysis chapter, deals with incremental analysis that focuses on selling or processing further. We often have products that will come to a split-off point, and after a certain point in production, they can be divided into multiple products. And so there may come a time when we have to decide whether to sell our product at the split-off point or to continue to process that product, and so we have to determine how profitable we can be if we do decide to move beyond that split-off point. So if you'll look at exercise 13, which deals with H&L beef products, processing cattle, they currently sell meat as sides of beef, or they can process it further into final cuts. It says, as a part of your company's strategic plan, management has considered new markets for their meat byproducts. And so the production process currently separates the hides and bones for sale to other manufacturers. They are trying to determine whether it would be profitable to continue to process those hides into leather, or to continue to process those bones into fertilizer. So they tell us that the cost of the cattle and of transporting, hanging, storing, and cutting the sides of beef are $125,000. Additional information shows us, if you will look in your text, the revenue for meat, bones, and hides if we sell them at the split-off point. So when we get to the point where we could sell the meat to someone else or process it further to final cuts of steak, if we just simply sell that meat to someone else and let them process it, we would generate $100,000 worth of sales. Okay, the same with bones. If we just sell the bones to someone else, let them process them into fertilize, we would make $20,000 in sales, $50,000 for hides. So what we want to take into consideration is what would our incremental sales be, our incremental cost, and our incremental profit if we continue to process any one or all three of these particular products after split off. So if you'll look at our example, they have provided for us kind of in a different format, but if I sell any of these products at their split off point, the meat before it's cut into steaks, the bones before it's processed into fertilize, the hides before it's processed into leather. These are the sales. Okay, this is incremental revenue. Now, if I continue to process the meat into steaks and the bones into fertilize and the hides into leather, this is the revenue that I would generate as a result of processing further. So the incremental revenue is simply the change. How much additional revenue do I generate if I continue to process? And obviously, we're processing a little further, so we should generate some additional revenue. So additional or incremental revenue of $100,000 for meat, $20,000 for bones, $5,000 for hides. But remember, there are some additional costs if we continue to process the meat, the bones, or the hides. And our book tells us that additional processing costs are $80,000 for meat, $15,000 for bones, $10,000 for hides. So even though I could generate an additional $100,000 additional revenue, incremental revenue for meat, I would incur $80,000 of incremental or additional cost for incremental or additional operating income of $20,000. So continuing to process the meat would be profitable, even the bones, because incremental revenue, additional revenues of $20, additional cost of $15, I would generate an additional profit, incremental profit of $5. Hides, not so popular. We only generate an additional $5,000 in revenue, but we would generate $10,000 in additional costs. So we would lose money if we chose to jump into the hides market with the operations, the effectiveness of the operations that we currently maintain. Once again, what we have determined here is that quantitatively we have two possible profitable options to continue to process meat into steaks and bones into fertilize. Now, we need to take into consideration the qualitative factors as well when we're doing this. What are the rules and regulations that we would need to follow to continue to turn these sides of beef into steak? Do we have the ability to follow and maintain all of the quality requirements that are required in this area? Is $5,000 enough? Is this profitable enough for us to jump into this endeavor? Maybe not. But do we give up at this point? Not yet. We may simply need to go back into our processes and see if these incremental costs are just too high. Are there any costs that we could eliminate or minimize that we didn't focus on to begin with? So once again, this just gives us the quantitative data that we need to begin our analysis. Now, of all the costs that we've discussed, if you'll notice, there was this $125,000 mentioned that we haven't considered in our analysis. The $125,000 was the cost of the cattle, transporting, hanging, storing, and cutting the beef. These costs are considered sunk cost. Okay? These costs are going to be incurred regardless of whether I process further the meat, the bones, or the hides. So the $125,000 are very important when we try to take into consideration the total cost of our product and the cost per unit or ounce or whatever we're trying to measure here. But as far as our processing decisions, whether we continue to process further, it is irrelevant because these $125,000 costs were taken into consideration before we ever got to the split off point. And that is the point where we end up with three different types of inventory or materials that we could process further. Sunk costs are important in the calculation of total cost, but not in taking into consideration whether we should process something further or simply sell it at the split off point.